the epistles of John. Not the Gospel of John, there's a big difference, but the Epistle of John, which is important to note because it is written and it is directed to a specific church, a specific people at a particular time. You know, you have to know and understand the context to understand what the author is driving at before you make giant leaps and applications for today. Now, we do not know a lot about this church. In fact, we really don't even know where the church is. But what we do know are the circumstances in this church. For if you look at the second chapter, the 19th verse, you find that it's a church that has split. It is a church in division. There is a group of people who have left this congregation, and John is writing to the people who have stayed. Why did they leave? Because they were what eventually comes to be called, they saw themselves as super Christians. You ever met one of those? Super Christians. They had it together and knew it all better than other people. If you want to read more about this, you know, you can read the history of the Gnostics, Gnostic. Gnostics is a Greek word that means knowledge. And these folks really believed, based on the theology they developed, and it was widespread throughout the Mediterranean, that if you didn't have this knowledge, you were less than. You were less than. And as they raised themselves up in this way, they simultaneously put people down. Not something I ever remember Jesus doing. In fact, quite the contrary. It was usually the people who thought they had all the knowledge and knew that they were righteous that Jesus came into conflict with and confronted often. The Pharisees and the Sadducees and the status quo, those who ran the temple and interpreted the law. You know, they got the part right about loving God to an extreme. But what they seem to miss or chose to ignore, the tag-on that Jesus gives it, is that it's not just good enough to love God, you have to also love your neighbor. And of course, defining who is my neighbor is the ultimate question, is it not? I mean, the parable of the Good Samaritan starts out with that. Who is my neighbor? And Jesus answers through that story. Well, the author of our scripture this morning is writing to a church in the midst of crisis. And if you've ever been in a congregation or known one that's gone through this kind of division, it can be pretty brutal. And he doesn't offer to them, you know, he doesn't berate them, he doesn't scold them, he doesn't really preach at them. You know, Paul did that in many instances in his letters, but John doesn't do that. What John says is what you have to remember is the center core of all belief. And if you don't believe this, then you need to get your act together. Because essentially saying, who do you think God is? Because your definition of God is going to define everything else from there. And he says, if you say God is love, then the challenge is to live by that. You see, you can't truly love God if you don't love your neighbor. And then he adds that very terse and harsh comment that says, if you say you love God and still hate your neighbor, you're a liar. Wow. Is that not a tough one? And why is this? Why does he circle around? What does he base this notion on about loving others? Because if you start out with the premise that God is love and that God created in love, and in the book of Genesis it says that we are made in the image of God, we are an extension of God, we are a reflection of God, then within all of us is the imago Dei, it is the spark of God, the embryo, the seed of God. So if you hate someone other, what's included in that is that reflection of the divine. Let me see if I can explain that a little better. It's similar to not liking someone because you didn't like their father or their mother. Because you see them as an extension of the parent. Or let me put it another way. It's like, and maybe you've done this, I know I've done this, and so forth. You invest a lot of time in making or purchasing a gift for someone, and you're really excited about it because you just think you're right on point, and you give it to that person, and they unwrap it, and they go, "Oh, that's nice, thank you." You know, not the ecstatic expectation that you had, and the gift doesn't feel bad that you said that, but you do. Because the gift is somehow a reflection of you and who you are and how you feel. It is an extension and reflection of your love. So the love our scripture talks about is very powerful. The challenge is in how fully we do or do not understand it, and how completely we apply or don't apply it, because it is a godly human characteristic. I said, I don't remember. I've been preaching too long, whether I said it or not. But, you know, I don't think infants are born loving. I think they learn to love. Because, you know, we know all these studies where if a baby is born into a family that is, you know, not caring, not nurturing, they grow up in different ways. And I you know, nature, what is it? Nurture nature, that I don't want to get into that, but I think we learn because love is modeled to us, and you're either committed to that model or you fall away from it. Mary Beth Bonacci, she illustrates this point in a very simple way as she wrote this. She said, you know, people use the word love in a lot of different ways. For example, she says, I often say that I love my mother and my father, but I also say I love pizza. When I say I love my mother and father, I'm telling them that I care deeply about them, that I love spending time with them, and that if they need me for anything or to do anything, I would do everything possible to help them. But when I say I love pizza, I'm not saying the same thing. Am I saying I care deeply and want to have a significant, long-lasting, enduring relationship with pepperoni? Am I saying that if pizza has a problem, I would be there for it? Of course not. I'm just saying that I enjoy eating it, but once I'm tired of it, once it's of no use to me, I throw it away, feed it to the dog, stick it in the back of the refrigerator until it gets green and moldy. It is no longer of value to me. She says this illustrates two examples of differences in defining love. Continuing then, she adds, how confusing when people talk about love, especially loving others. Which way do you love people? Do you want what is best? Do they want what is best for you, or do they just want you around until they don't? And when you're done meeting their needs, they don't care for you anymore. So she concludes, the next time someone looks in your eyes and says, I love you, you look right back at them into their eyes and say, would that be pizza love or the real thing? Is there not truth to that? You see, the response of John in this letter, he's telling this congregation, if you are going to be witnesses of Christ, and you are going to truly love God, your love has to be the real thing. It can't be false. You see, when I say that when I refer to the color red or I refer to the color blue, you all know what I'm talking about. When I talk about the sky or the ocean, you all know what I'm talking about. But the interesting thing, when I talk about love, love has no definition and it has no meaning except what we give to it. Right? Everything else, you know when I use those other words. But when I say love one another, it has no meaning except what you give to it. Good or bad, honest or not, manipulative, sacrificial, committed and enduring, or self-centered and short-lived. It means as much or as little as we make of it. And you can tell when you talk to people or meet people, you can tell deep down what people love and don't love in their soul. As they describe who is worthy, who is not worthy, who should be loved, who isn't worthy of love, who has earned their love, who hasn't. And the challenge we all face is to lay claim to the Christian faith that enables us to stand in the mirror in the end of the day and say, the God I worship is a God of love, a God who loves everybody. How did I do today at that? Do you remember the song we all sang when we were kids? You're my song expert back there. And they'll know we are Christians by our love. How well these days are we doing that? In a writing titled The Echo of Hate, where I got my sermon title, there's a story that the author tells about a family that has gone on vacation in the Rocky Mountains, and the mother and the father and the child has done something that's got him in trouble. And, you know, as is usually the case, the dad's the buddy and the mom does the disciplining, and so the child looks at the mother and says those words that we have all heard as parents at one time or another, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. He screamed it so loud in the canyon that suddenly the words came back to him, hate you, hate you, hate you. The little boy became scared and ran back to his mother. And he said, there's a man out there, Mom, that hates me. And the mom did not get upset. She just took the boy back to the edge and she said, I want you to stand here and say, I love you, I love you, I love you. And it immediately came back, love you, love you, love you. The mother said, remember, son, you always get what you give back. You always get back what you give. There are a lot of people these days that are shouting at other people with judgments and opinions. And they're like this echo. They're bouncing around everywhere, returning their cadence in a tone that is often unpleasant, causing schism and division, just like in this church that John is writing to. By the way, do you wonder at all whatever happened to these super Christians? They just faded away. They faded away. But the Christians to which John writes about love, they endured. Their story does not disappear, which recalls the words of the Apostle Paul that when everything else is gone, it is love that endures and lasts. Because we are called to hope all things, believe all things, endure all things, and that's love. John's advice is not some sermon, it is not some argument, it is not some diatribe, it is not some lecture or preaching ad. Rather, John's answer to the main issue in this church is very simple, and it is a prescription that can be summarized in one word. Love. wife always says, if it can be summarized that easy, why does it take you 15 minutes? It can be summarized in one word, love. And when you leave here today, ask yourself, how are we doing at that? Amen. At this time, we will continue our worship through the offering of our gifts, and we invite the usher.